Duxbury programming, including streaming and watching replays on Duxbury YouTube. First item is to call this meeting to order. This is the September 16th meeting, and the first item is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We have an executive session. If I could get a motion.
I move that we enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing strategy with respect to collective bargaining, DPW, and public safety dispatchers, since an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the litigating and bargaining position of the town. If the chair so declares, in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21, and if the board will adjourn, and that the board will adjourn and reconvene in open session on or about 7:00 p.m. immediately thereafter, after the completion of the executive session.
Is there something here that the chair reads in?
Yeah, I think we're going to do 6:30 instead of 7.
Thank you. As chair, I declare that the necessity for an executive session to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for contract negotiations, as to do so in an open session may have a detrimental effect on the town's bargaining, strategizing, and negotiating position. Can you second it?
Second.
All those in favor?
Need a roll call?
Roll call.
Brian, aye.
Cindy, aye.
And Amy, aye. This meeting has been called to order. We've come out of our executive session. We are now going to be in an open session, and the first item on the agenda is open forum. This is for anybody who may have an issue that they want to bring up, and we can consider it for a future agenda item. Anyone for open session this evening?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you, Brian.
I have 4 things to share tonight. First is the 9/11 Memorial Observance. I want to thank Chief Rob Reardon and the Duxbury Fire Department for hosting the annual 9/11 Memorial Observance. Oh, thank you. I'll try that again.
There.
I'd like to thank Chief Rob Reardon and the Duxbury Fire Department for hosting the annual 9/11 Memorial Observance last week. Speakers included Chief Reardon, Police Chief Mike Carbone, Senator Pat O'Connor, Father Bob Dean from Holy Family Church offered some prayers, and our own Nicole DeGennaro of the town's HR department sang beautifully. Duxbury High School senior Jack Rubin played the trumpet. We thank Jack. Color guards from the fire and police departments, as well as American Legion Post 223 participated. The program was very well attended, and I'd like to thank everyone who took part. Second is Historic Preservation Day. I'd like to congratulate the Duxbury Local Historic District Commission on its successful Historic Preservation Day this past Saturday. Preservation expert Chris Skelly, formerly of the Mass Historic Commission, gave an informative presentation about historic preservation, and a number of historic properties across the town were open free of charge to welcome visitors in the afternoon. Third, September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. During a meeting last week, the MBTA Advisory Board's Commuter Rail Committee, of which this town is a member, received a presentation from the commuter rail operator Keolis about ongoing efforts to prevent suicide on the rails. In particular, the commuter rail is partnering with a nonprofit known as Operation Lifesaver, and will be hosting an educational program in person at South Station on Thursday, September 26th, commuting hours between 3 and 6 p.m. And in addition, I note that if you or someone you care about is in emotional distress or is having thoughts of suicide, free and confidential help is available all day, every day, by calling or texting the number 988. That's 988. And finally, the MBTA Communities Working Group will meet tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. in the Senior Center. While it's not a public forum like September 5th, the meeting is open to the public, and anyone who's interested is welcome to attend. The next public forum will be on October 17th. Thank you.
Anyone from the public, anything under open forum, or anyone on Zoom, Michelle? No? Okay. New business, we have a discussion regarding the DPW memorandums of agreement, and we'll ask Jeannie Horn, our HR person, to walk us through. Can you get up to the podium? I'm sorry.
At the mic.
You have to go to the microphone, sorry.
Okay. I'm Jeannie Horn, Human Resources Director, and I just wanted to provide an overview of the memorandum of agreements or memorandum of understanding that are before us tonight. The first is with the DPW. So we have a memorandum of understanding with regard to out-of-grade pay for our building maintenance technician who covered the vacancy of the facilities director for a time period, as well as Glenn Kavicki, the supervising highway foreperson, who covered an FMLA leave for the DPW operations manager. So there is additional pay that we will provide to both of those individuals who are part of the DPW collective bargaining agreement, and they covered positions that are part of the non-union personnel policies. So there's a uniqueness to these two situations that we didn't have another mechanism to handle. And then the second memorandum of understanding is with the DPW as well, and it covers rehires of previous DPW union members. It also covers the recalculation of sick days as it relates to their date of hire, It's a correction of an inconsistent practice, and it covers what step new hires can be paid at. It allows the town to hire persons into positions beyond step one, depending on related work experience, skill set, licenses, and degree of difficulty to fill the vacancy. This is consistent with our existing practice. We're simply memorializing it. So those are the two DPW memorandums of agreement. And then we also have a memorandum of agreement with the public safety dispatchers, which provides for the introduction of emergency medical dispatch services for the town of Pembroke. And in exchange for that, the town of Pembroke is providing $50,000 for that service. We have a intermunicipal agreement that will cover the current fiscal year, so it will be for fiscal year 25. And in exchange for that additional work, we are going to use those monies from Pembroke to provide additional training to those bargaining unit members and to cover the cost associated with their vacancies from those positions while they are getting that training. So it's a win-win for all parties involved.
Thank you. Questions? Just for the public, we've discussed this in executive session, so we are comfortable with sharing our motions.
Yep, just looking for a date here.
Does anyone from the public have any questions on this? Ready for you.
Okay. I move that the Select Board vote to approve the memoranda of understanding dated August 2, 2024 and September 1, 2024 regarding Duxbury DPW employees, AFSME 93, Local 1700, as presented.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move that the Select Board vote to approve the memorandum of agreement regarding public safety dispatchers, MCOP, Local 376A, as presented.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
I think we have one more,
I
right?
think that was it. We did two DPW
That was
and
it?
one public safety. Yep.
There you go, you did the two DPWs.
Yep.
Okay, next item on the agenda is a discussion regarding early voting hours for the presidential election, and I see our awesome Sue Kelly here to talk about that.
Good evening.
Madam Chair, before the town clerk starts, there is an insert that is hot off the press that goes along with this discussion. It should be right there in front of you in the clip.
I don't have one.
Hold on,
There it
here it
is.
is, it's in the middle here. I'll
I
give
didn't
you
get
one.
a,
Yeah, you
oh,
did.
did I? I
Yep.
did. Oh, thank you, Mary. Oh, I got one.
Okay, we got it.
This is really, what
Thank you,
I've
Sue.
passed out to you is really an illustration to help you understand what the staff in my office is going through for early voting and why I'm here to discuss amending not only our office hours, but the early voting hours for in-person early voting. The Votes Act that was passed in 2022 made early voting by mail and in person a law in Massachusetts. Prior to that, we did have vote by mail for the presidential in 2020, but that was due to COVID. So this is our first presidential election with the law on the books for early voting. According to the Votes Act, we have to hold in-person early voting for 2 weeks prior to the state, in this case, presidential election. And the voting dates for that are Saturday, October 19th through Friday, November 1st. Prior to vote by mail, this was the life cycle of a ballot. A voter would go to the polls, sign out the ballot, vote it, drop it in the tabulator. With vote by mail, this is what voting has become. This is a vote by mail ballot. It's gone from a 4-minute process at the polls to about 17 minutes per ballot. That goes from the moment we receive your application scanning the application in, preparing the ballot packet, mailing it out, receiving it back, making sure it's complete, matching signatures on the ballot envelope, processing it, opening the envelopes, and casting the ballots, either prior to the election during early voting or advanced processing or at the polls. So with this in mind, we already have 3,700 applications at 17 minutes per item. You know, we will be busy. So in light of that, what we have decided to do, I did this 2 years ago as well, is the town clerk's office will modify their hours. Instead of being open for town hall business hours, we will modify our hours to work Mondays from 9 to 7, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday from 9 to 3, and then Friday 9 to 12:30. So what that will do is give us time at the beginning and the end of every day to work on processing these items as well as what we take in for in-person early voting. That's not to say that we won't help people if they come to the counter. The office will be open, but our hours that will be posted are shortened a little bit. So the Votes Act indicates that for the first week of early voting, we have to offer in-person early voting for 50% of the hours that town hall is traditionally open. And the second week is offered during the usual business hours of town hall. So because I'm shortening the town clerk's office hours, what I would like to request from you is to modify early voting hours from the town hall business hours to coincide with what our reduced hours will be. And that, as I said, will allow us time to process the ballots that will be coming in. We will be open. My suggested hours are Monday, 9 a.m. We will stay open until 7 to allow people coming home from work the opportunity to vote on their way home. Tuesdays and Wednesdays and Thursdays, we would open early voting at 9 in the morning and remain open until 3. And Friday, we would open at 9 a.m. and close early voting at 12. So that's shortening it just a little bit. I am staying open the full number of hours on both weeks. I'm not doing the 50% the first week. We're just staying open the same schedule for both weeks. And then on Saturdays, we will be open from 9 to 3. There's 2 weekends that are included in the in-person early voting period. So we'll be doing 6 hours on each of those 2 Saturdays. All of the voting will take place at the Steel Building. I've been in touch with the school. They've been very helpful in moving the practices and so forth that have been scheduled for the Steel during that time. And I appreciate their cooperation in that effort. And I think that's all that I have
This is it.
to suggest. If you have any questions, please.
A lot of opportunity, so questions, board members?
No, I thank you very much for
It's a lot of work.
all the work, right? I mean, so whatever works.
No.
There's a question about the motion.
Anyone from the public have any questions? And Susan, where will we be able to find all these hours in case people are interested?
If you do approve it this evening, we've been updating our webpage with every bit of information we have when we have it. We don't expect our ballots to come in until the state said no later than October 7th. So, whenever we get a notification, we're putting that out there so people are aware. For those who have not already applied to vote by mail for this election, you may have noticed you've probably received 2 postcards already. The 3rd postcard will be coming if you had not already signed up to vote by mail for the presidential. And then obviously in-person early voting, we'll post the schedule right on the front page of our website.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hearing no questions, I will take a motion.
Okay, this is a little long, but bear with me. I move that the Select Board amend the mandated hours for in-person early voting to be held on Saturday, October 19th through Friday, November 1st, excluding Sundays, as follows. Instead of holding voting during the normal business hours of Town Hall, in-person early voting will be held Saturday, October 19th, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., Sunday, October 20th, no early voting. Monday, October 21st, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Tuesday, October 22nd, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Wednesday, October 23rd, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Thursday, October 24th, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Friday, October 25th, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Saturday, October 26th, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Sunday, October 27th, no early voting. Monday, October 28th, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Tuesday, October 29th, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Wednesday, October 30th, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Thursday, October 31st, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And Friday, November 1st, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. All voting will take place at the Steel Building, 130 St. George Street.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And we thank you.
You're very
Very
welcome.
much.
Thank you.
Discussion and vote pertaining to a request to use ARPA funding for the update to the town's hazard mitigation plan. I'm thinking, are you,
No, I was waving goodbye to Joe because I figured he was going to be leaving, as well, Justin. Yeah. This is for Mary.
So in your packet, you should have received a memo requesting the use of ARPA funding. We are requesting the use of $24,000 in order for the town to contract with an outside agency to prepare a hazard, you didn't get it?
The new one? I mean, tonight we should have gotten it?
No, it's in the packet that was
it's in
emailed.
our electronic packet, got
Okay.
it. Dated August 28th.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, got it.
So we are asking to utilize $24,000 of ARPA funding in order to contract with an outside agency to prepare a hazard mitigation plan for the town. The town's current plan has expired. It was expired in January, and the town is required to prepare a hazard mitigation plan every 5 years. So this would be an appropriate use, not having to wait for town meeting appropriation for the planning board to get started on this process.
I have a question. Okay.
Sure.
Yes, please.
ARPA funds, how much was the balance?
Did this chart go to everybody?
Got it right here. Hold on one second.
It didn't.
The short answer to your question, I did prepare a chart, we can distribute it to you, but the current available balance of ARPA funding is $307,000, and that is after reducing it by this $24,000.
And do we have a time frame by which we have to spend that?
We do. So at the top of the chart that Rainey just handed out for you, just so that you can have it for reference, the ARPA program in its entirety will be completed December 31st of 2024, so the end of this year. So regardless of whether we're talking about funds that are administered by Plymouth County or the funds that we've received directly, the federal government is closing this program as of December 31st, 2024. What that means is that we need to have had all of our ARPA funds committed or obligated, either through a signed contract or a purchase order for goods and services as of December 31st, 2024. And then you have 2 full years until December 31st, 2026 to complete those projects and fully expend the funds.
So we have to get a move on.
We have, we will be just fine, Cindy. There is no end of need.
Questions, Brian?
No, straightforward.
I have a question. So we realize that our plan is expired. So I'm assuming that that's a result of, again, not having a planner on board, or how did this, and it fell through the cracks? So are there other plans that we should be concerned about that have expired and that we may be able to utilize some of the ARPA funding for? If
This is the only one I was aware of.
well, we might want to try to ask somebody to look into that, just to avoid any, because it's a concern, you know, this, we need to have this plan actually in place
Correct.
in order to get certain funding. So, and we know from trying to get some assessments done for the MBTA that, you know, these studies can take some time. to get people lined up and to actually do. So I just would hope that we could make sure that there's nothing else that fell through the cracks that we don't know about.
Well,
Do you have an idea, actually, of how long this process is with,
To prepare the plan? I would defer to, I think I saw Paul here, right? And Paul, you were the one in
Paul, do you have any recollection?
MAPC?
Good evening. It usually takes about a year and a half to complete one of those plans, and it's a joint effort that brings together town's public safety staff, Department of Public Works, Planning, Police, Fire, and requires public outreach and at the beginning and at the end and input in the middle. So usually about a year and a half.
okay, thanks, Paul.
So that being said, we are not eligible for federally funded hazard mitigation assistance programs from either FEMA or MEMA.
That is correct.
In that interim.
That is correct.
And there's no way around that. There's no
That I don't know.
extension of a plan or, you know,
I've taken a peek, and it is clear. No.
Okey doke.
That seems to worry me. So if there were some workarounds and some way that we could, you know, get coverage during that, it feels very vulnerable.
Which is why we're bringing it forward this evening, so that we don't
Appreciate
have to wait
that.
until town meeting.
Yeah. Okay, any further questions or questions from the public? Hearing none, I'll take a motion.
I move that the Select Board approve the ARPA funding as requested for the hazard mitigation plan in the amount of $24,000.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Coastal Resiliency Task Force update to the Select Board. Mr. Amory. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, members of the board. Thank you very much for the opportunity for the task force to be here to give you a report, an update, since we were last here in April. So let's jump right into some of the updates that we do have and some priorities. Since the April, the meeting last April, our charge has been revised by the Select Board, which passed unanimously, 5-0. Paul Halkiotis has been a wonderful interim planning director, attending our meetings and offered a guiding hand as we've navigated toward our way forward, considering a couple of things in particular. One, this is quite a segue, with the expiration of the 2018 Hazard Mitigation Plan, what is required to make Duxbury eligible for FEMA funding? And does this affect the Snug Harbor project funding at all? And to this end, we've updated pertinent portions of the envisioned Duxbury 2019 implementation table per the request of the Planning Department for their use in updating the Hazard Mitigation Plan. The job description also Paul has helped out with for an environmental planner or resiliency coordinator. And in our view, this planning concerns more than just coastal resiliency. It must address climate resiliency. The task force met with Alex Chin on Fiscal Advisory Committee activities and discussion about task force coastal resiliency priorities in coordination with the town's capital projects and funding overlaps. Subsequently, we've understood that the town is planning to organize stakeholders to determine a 5 to 30-year capital plan. This focus group would likely include representatives of town departments and members of boards and committees. The task force met with Police Chief Carbone and Fire Chief Reardon about public safety issues, such as flooding at Gurnett Road and the Bluefish River. Emergency access. We all know the great bridge out to the beach cannot be used for emergency vehicles. Inaccurate storm predictions affect the response time and the need for high water vehicles. The task force met again with Leslie Fields of the Woods Hole Group A PowerPoint MVP grant application having been denied, Leslie did note other grant opportunities. An overlap of task force priorities with the town's capital projects was also noted. Shannon Godden of the Duxbury Beach Reservation has provided periodic updates of the Barrier Beach nourishment. At the invitation of DBR, members of the task force made a site visit to see what's been done and what comes next. The task force sent a letter of support included with the DBR grant application. We met with Joe Messina of the Duxbury Beach Management Commission and Dick Brennan of the Shellfish Advisory Committee to learn more about their activities and challenges, and staying tuned to the efforts of all and the coordination of coastal resiliency planning. They noted the changing condition of the bay, nitrogen loading and increased water temperature, and ongoing testing of water quality. The Talent Bank. The task force will arrange interviews with Duxbury residents who have expressed interest in serving on the task force. Currently, we have one form for review. We are looking for members. Efforts to spread the word about the Coastal Resiliency Task Force in the Clipper have been unsuccessful. Meeting dates have not been posted, and a written update on the task force coastal resiliency activities has not been published. We need to push harder. Task force participation in the Snug Harbor Plan feasibility study is also ongoing. Per the request of the Seaport Economic Council on Tuesday, that is tomorrow, the 17th, from 2 to 4, there will be an on-site visit with local, state, and federal agencies to gain feedback on the proposed waterfront improvements before submission of the grant application for the project. Efforts to coordinate with the Alternative Energy Committee and Sustainable Duxbury and Open Space is also ongoing. For example, come to the Energy Fair at the high school cafeteria on Saturday, October 5th from 10 to 2. Save energy, save money, save the planet, and please pass the word. So an update on task force priorities. Our priorities remain, how do we move forward? Town Manager Rainey Reed, thank you Rainey, joined us on August 5th to discuss talking points in advance of this evening's report to the Select Board within the framework of the April 2024 Select Board goals. Goal number 5, work with the Coastal Resiliency Task Force and Alternative Energy Committee to advance climate resiliency initiatives, including exploring and presenting to the Select Board potential funding sources. The environmental planner or resiliency coordinator is a high priority. The task force reported to the Select Board in June, a year ago, that a staff position is urgently needed. Consider seriously the idea of shifting the position from planning, there is no planning director other than interim director, of course, to conservation, which has able administrative infrastructure in place. Think about it. Climate resiliency is all about open space and conservation. Or at least this might be the procedure until there is a director of planning. Funding for the position is to be determined. At the March 2025 annual town meeting, we're hoping for a vote on a new position, and the time frame would be to start work on July 1st, 2025. We know there's a process to go through for this, but honestly, we as a task force just don't quite understand what that process is to be able to make progress. The hazard mitigation plan, without it, and I think these questions have been asked, and it's great to hear that is updated funding to actually do that report. What departments are affected? What are the current steps and timeline for updating the plan and Duxbury's eligibility for FEMA funding? I think you said a moment ago that Duxbury would not be eligible for MEMA funding either. Emergency communication. In the event of extreme high tides and storm surge, what will be our emergency communication in addition to current means, such as reverse 911? And for those not necessarily tuned to the media. And then our projects, the coastal resiliency adaptation priorities. We have the Barrier Beach nourishment, of course. Without the beach, there is no bay. The Gurnett Road adaptation is a high priority. The Bluefish River, of course. floodplain adaptation, including Powder Point and Washington Street, the Marshall Street Bridge elevation, Snug Harbor and Washington Street elevations, and the Harrison Street culvert replacement. Most of these fall under the purview of the Department of Public Works, interesting to note. In each of these projects, in terms of funding, there would be two phases, as you know. The first phase would be for design and permitting, which, relatively speaking, is short money. The second phase would be construction. Part of the design process also, in terms of design and permitting, is the opportunity to look at alternatives to approaches to solving the problem. So, for instance, Powder Point Avenue, there may be, the exploration will be done to see how many different ways, what different ways there are to solve the problem of road elevation and sea level rise in that location. Grants. The seawall, the permits are in hand. Is funding still to be determined? CSA Consulting and CBM Consulting have been working with the town on researching grants. The Woods Hole Consulting Group provides assistance with grant applications at no cost. Sources such as the Seaport Economic Council, the CZM, and the Department of Ecological Restoration, do these require an updated hazardous mitigation plan? Outreach. It's about communication and connection. The Rising Tide signage project from a year ago was a no-go. We did a talk at the Senior Center earlier this year about having conversations about climate change. A climate cafe at the library, a venue for supportive gathering for all ages to nurture and enhance emotional well-being. An open space survey, a town-wide open space survey, recently offered an opportunity to be heard. And we have the upcoming Energy Fair. So we are also constantly looking for ways to outreach, to communicate. And we are looking forward to annual town meeting, March 2025. We are going to be proposing a warrant article for a proclamation, we being the Task Force and Alternative Energy Committee and Sustainable Duxbury, naming climate change as a threat to our health and safety and the urgency of committing to climate resiliency. In addition to that, we'd be presenting a committee report, and hopefully, if all is in place, the town would vote on a resiliency coordinator and walk away with a yes. So in this climate era, between the urgent need for a resiliency planner, updating the hazard mitigation plan, funding the seawall, emergency access, coordination of capital and coastal resiliency projects, and keeping citizens of Duxbury informed with communication about the root cause of climate change and how we ramp up resiliency efforts at a pace commensurate with the scale of the challenge. We do have a lot on our plate. Let's dig in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amory. I'm going to turn it over to our chair, who has
Present.
arrived.
Thank you. And I'm going to pass it on to my fellow members first. Does anybody have any questions on the board?
Not a question, but David, could you just go over some of the people that will be at this energy fair? Some of the groups and companies?
Yes, may I grab a folder here?
Of course. I mean, it's really impressive, so I just wanted to, make sure that people are aware.
A lot of effort has gone into the planning of this energy fair. I can't claim any of it. Some of you may have seen a wonderful poster that was made for it. Energy Fair 2024. Save energy, save money, save the planet. And the organizers, the idea is to provide access to experts discussing home heat pump systems, energy saving tips, and ways to reduce one's carbon footprint.
There it is.
And they've lined up a number of people. Mass Save, a company about solar batteries, Sustainable Duxbury, of course, Alternative Energy, South Shore Permaculture, Solar Grids Boston, Lowe's Electric Lawn Equipment and Blowers, the Duxbury High School Sustainability Club, the Plymouth Solar Energy Installation. Bear with me. A number of car companies, Volvo, Tesla, BMW, Hyundai, Subaru, Nissan, Toyota. There'd be just a wide range. I don't seem to have that piece of paper with me, but there was a wide range of companies. There'll be a wide range of automobiles on display, not for test driving, but certainly for looking at and understanding what's involved.
Thank you. Anyone else have any other questions? No. Any members of the public have any questions? Thank you very much for your
Thank you for your
presentation.
You're
ongoing
welcome.
efforts.
I should point out also that the task force will have a table there as well, so that the point is for all of us to be collaborating on this effort. There's not one specific piece of it that's going to do it alone. It's all together. Thank you.
Very much.
Agreed.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Next, we have a,
Oh,
sorry,
Sue Schofield. I really appreciate your presentation. I do want to also mention, I know climate change is really important, but there were a few things that I saw in that flyer, the windmills for one. And I think we can't overlook what's going on out in Vineyard Sound. So with the windmills falling down, you know, all of the blades falling. So it's very controversial. If you go down to Newport, if you go offshore, go down to those communities, they're fighting very hard against those right now. So, and also with the batteries that are in the cars, the lithium batteries, and how they get the materials for those batteries should also be highlighted. So I definitely think it's great to find ways to save the planet, to work towards it, but we can't discount these other, there's pros and cons to everything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have a discussion pertaining to the harbor pedestrian walkway, and it's going to be presented by Paul Halkiotis, our former interim planning director, and Sabrina Kaplan of the Duxbury Rural and Historical Society.
David Corey is
Ah, Mr. Corey.
How would I connect the computer?
No, she has our presentation.
Oh, she does.
I do. Takes me a moment.
Then I'll just have
Mr. Halkiotis going first?
Would you like to
Or
start,
Mr.
David?
Corey?
All right, so I'm David Corey from Linden Lane, and tonight I'm representing, along with Donna Wood and Sabrina Kaplan, the Duxbury Rural and Historical Society. And what I'd like to describe is a proposal that may help traffic in the Snug Harbor area and create a public space that may be both increasing safety and making it a more pleasant place to be.
Yes.
That's right. Okay, so if you go to the next slide. One of the problems with the current configuration of streets in the Snug Harbor area is that it's not easy to get to the stores along Washington Street from some of the enterprises that are along the waterfront. In particular, if you click on the next thing, you can see that to go from the harbor to the shops on Washington Street, you have to go up Mattakesa Court or continue around past the fish market, which is a fairly congested area. Or, the next slide, if you're going from the yacht club to this area, again, you have to pass up Mattakesa Court. And the next. If you're going from the DPMS to the shops, there's, again, passage along this road, which can be quite congested, especially at times when sailing classes are getting out or starting. And finally, if you're parking a boat trailer along Washington Street, then the path to the town landing takes you along Mattakesa Court. So there's a lot of congestion here. It's a very narrow street that two cars can barely pass each other on. There are no sidewalks, and we sometimes have children walking up and down there, and it's just dangerous. So the idea that we had, in the next slide, is to, and maybe go ahead, is to create a new path from the shops on Washington Street and other things on Washington Street to the Snug Harbor area. One way that had been considered is to widen Mattakesa Court. In the next click. But that has problems. Although it's been considered in the Snug Harbor project plan, that would raise sea level. It's not all that easy, in part because Mattakeesit Court comes very close to the Nathaniel Windsor House. The next click, you can see here, and then if you click again, you can see that Mattakeesit Court comes very, very close to this northerly projection of the Nathaniel Windsor House. And there's considerable concern that taking any additional land here would jeopardize or threaten the foundation of part of the Nathaniel Windsor House. So instead, what we suggest would be good would be to open a pathway that goes to the north side of the Sweetser's building to the town parking lot. And you can see that it would start here, just to the north of the building. And then this area that's now wooded would be opened up to create a pathway that's about 10 feet wide and a little more than 200 feet long, and would be a direct pathway to the parking lot. So if this were the case, then all of these stakeholders could pass along the harbor walk to get to the shops, or people parking boat trailers here could take the same pathway back. So how would we do this? The next slide. So the idea we have in mind is that we'd create a new public space in the heart of Snug Harbor. It would be for pedestrians only, although I don't suppose we could keep the bicycles off it. It would be wide enough not only for the traffic, if at 10 feet wide, it might be wide enough for tables where you could sit and get a coffee, or maybe have your lunch from some of the shops on Washington Street. In doing so, it would separate the pedestrians from the car and boat traffic on Mattakeesit Court. The other thing is that it would allow overflow parking on the town lot for those who are going to the shops. Often there's no parking there, and often it's difficult to get in and out of the parking in front of the shop. So you could go around, park in the town lot, go up the harbor walk, and then you'd be right there. And finally, we think that this could be an educational kind of thing, in the sense that we could have displays produced by the Historical Society on the history of Snug Harbor, Duxbury maritime history, and so forth. So it could create a public space that would serve a number of functions, not just ameliorating the traffic issue. Next. Now, let me turn now to Sabrina, who will talk about the implementation of the plan.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your attention. So basically what the DRHS, Duxbury Rural and Historical Society, is proposing is to grant an easement to the town for that narrow strip of land between our property and the Sweetser building. And ideally, we would undertake the initial construction of the path. So open up our fences on both ends, the parking lot end, down by the harbor, and the Washington Street end, clear the path, and lay down the gravel or whatever grade for the base that we determine is appropriate. And so we would undertake the initial construction, and ideally the town would accept an easement of this strip of land, so that it would then be DRHS property in perpetuity, so because a title transfer is not allowed, but that the town would be then accepting any future liabilities and future maintenance of the walkway. If you could turn the slide, please. Basically, we feel as though this would be a service to the town. It would increase public safety in the area, and although it's incorporated into the Snug Harbor Working Group's plans that are overall addressing sea level rise and looking at raising the level of the parking lot, et cetera. That plan is many years off, and I can tell you from where I sit at DRHS, at that corner on Washington Street, it's dangerous now, and I think that it is not an enormous undertaking for what we would get back in terms of public safety. We can continue to the next slide, please. So just to review, the terms are that we would grant a perpetual easement, we would retain ownership of the property, complete initial construction. Ideally, the town of Duxbury would assume liability and maintenance expenses and then maintain the harbor walk in, at least in the manner in which it was received by the town. And the justifications are that this would be a short, safe, ADA-compliant passage between the town pier and the Duxbury Yacht Club, DBMS, Sweetsters Building, Washington Street. It would allow for safe parking at the town lot when Sweetsters' parking area was busy and full. And also, I think, be a nice public space for people to enjoy. In addition, I would add that the crosswalk that is currently across Washington Street, and it is not quite at the corner of Matakeesit, that is also not in an ideal space. And I think that if we were to commit to this project, that it would be very sensible to move that crosswalk down to the opening of the harbor walk between our property and Sweetsters. I think that if you're there to observe it, that would be a much better location for that crosswalk. And we do have community support for this project. The Duxbury Yacht Club and Duxbury Bay Maritime School are in favor of what we're doing. I spoke with the owner of the Sweetster property. He is in favor of it. It doesn't touch his property. It's all on our side. But yeah, everybody we've spoken to has been in support of this. So basically, we're wondering if the select board is also, and what you would advise as next steps if we are to proceed with this undertaking.
So, we'll take questions from the board first, but I will also, we are a board, and we do have a town manager. I did want to put Rainey on the spot here. Rainey, do you have any thoughts or concerns or issues first of all?
Well, I have a placeholder article on the special town meeting warrant for this. If it's in November or in March, I don't know if it makes a big difference. The liability question is something that would be reviewed by council, of course. But if the board's interested, I mean, we can posit the article on the warrant, and then you guys can vote it from there.
Okay, great. Members of the board, go ahead. Amy.
Well, first, let me say thank you. It's nice to have, I mean, this seems like a really good proposal that might alleviate some of the stressors down there and really be a nice addition to the town, for the town, so thank you. A couple of questions. I was glad to see that it's ADA compliant, because I know that that's going to add some complexities to this. But I was wondering about the liability issue. Do we have any other properties that you can think of where we have an easement or a right-of-way, but assume legal liability for that easement across private property? I can't think of any, but...
I can't off the top of my head, but I could find out, because I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah, because I'm not sure.
Yeah,
Maybe drainage easements?
we have the Zanetti property, but that's
Drainage
just for,
easements, but this
that's for
is-
water. That's not-
But when you have a drainage easement or a site easement, it doesn't allow for the type of public use that's going to be on
Yeah, this is active. This is not.
This is
yeah.
active, and
I'll have to look. I'll find out. And by the way, I did want to point out that after this, we're going to have another presentation from Carlos Pena from Foth Engineering to look at the global picture down there, just so you're aware.
On another night.
No, tonight. He's here now.
so...
It's all part of the coastal resiliency thing.
Okay, so, and then that being said, this is a vulnerable area. We're talking, just the presenters before you were the coastal resiliency. I guess one of my questions would be in if there was flooding or damage that occurred where we're not going to get any help from MEMA or FEMA right now, so would the town be on the, who's going to, it's kind of those legal questions that I have. But at first glance, this does seem like, I can't think of any reason that we wouldn't want to do this, but why would we need to go to town meeting? What, is there a?
For the easement aspect,
Okay, and is it an easement or a right-of-way?
I think you had proposed an easement, correct? Yeah.
I think
Just as we had done
maybe
for
more
Zanetti.
appropriate as a right-of-way. I
Just as
don't know.
what?
That'll be a legal question.
Pardon?
Just as what?
As we had done for Zanetti, next door to the DPW.
Does anybody else have a question on the board?
I don't think it's a great proposal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I know we've been we've done other measures in that area. I mean, we had to drop the speed down to 15 on recommendation from the highway safety. It's commendable that you're
15?
trying to help out pedestrian traffic there and work with and be a good community partner. So I'm appreciative of this effort, and thank you.
Okay.
I think we should dot our i's and cross our t's, but it sounds like an excellent
Continue
idea.
the conversation. Okay.
Yeah, and we, generally, when there's a warrant article, and it sounds like there's going to be, we're gonna have a discussion and we'll vote on it, so prior to that, we can flush out all these issues
Yeah.
and come back on it.
And I think Paul may have mentioned that it would require a sketch, a plan to accompany that, because when we do an easement, we have to refer to a plan that would show where it is on the earth and the meets and bounds and all that stuff.
Okay.
So, it sounds like the guidance from the board here is that it's a good idea.
We're giving it a thumbs up.
Move forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And
Thank
thank
you.
you to David, who, this is technically his idea. I can't take credit.
Good idea, Mr. Corey.
Thank you.
The next part of this is this,
Okay.
the Snug Harbor plan, and Carlos Pena is here to discuss that. Hi, Carlos.
Okay. Mr. Pena, you on?
And Michelle has the presentation for the screen as well.
Oh, you said he was on.
No, yeah, I meant, sorry, it's like right there in real life.
Come on in.
Oh, come on up there.
Sorry, I just have a habit of reading the teleprompter. Could you introduce yourself and just how this ties in with the discussion we're having regarding this harbor pedestrian stop
Great.
walkway?
Well, good evening. My name's Carlos Pena from Filth Infrastructure and Environment. I've been working with our staff and John Ramsey from Sustainable Coastal Solutions on the resiliency project for Snug Harbor. We have also been working with, as I probably mentioned before, the town of Duxbury, the Harbor Master's Office, the DPW, Conservation Commission, the Coastal Resiliency Task Force, and the Planning Board, along with the Duxbury Bay Maritime School, Sweetersville Properties, the Duxbury Yacht Club, and Bayside Marine. So it's been a great community effort, and I think the idea behind the project was that we would attempt to address predicted sea level rise on the project and also take care of a few other issues that have come up during our meetings and not have a negative impact on abutting properties. So with that, we can turn to the next slide. So this is pretty much an outline of where flooding would occur out there. And it seems to coincide, and go on to the next slide, and I'll try to be quick through this. It seems to go with the contours that were on the previous plan, what you experienced on January 13th, 2024. Seems to be a direct correlation. So along with addressing sea level rise, and we can move to the next slide, this is the existing conditions plan that we created for the project. We compiled existing plans. The town was generous to give us the plans that they had. Duxbury Bay Maritime School contributed their plans. We did some topography out there and consolidated all the plans that existed for the site and compiled it onto one location so we could thoroughly assess the site. From this came obviously the need to address sea level rise. We also discovered that Massachusetts Court, which has a width of 16.5 feet, is not sufficient for two-way traffic. And as we mentioned earlier, the issues that are associated with pedestrian traffic also using that. The boat ramp ends at about mid-tide, down by low tide, so it's not a full tidal access to the boat ramp. And we'd also want to make it wider. The town pier will need to be, we worked with the Harbor Master's office to reconfigure that, so it's a more efficient layout. We're looking at adding or redoing the Harbor Master's building as part of this project. So we're going to show that on the proposed conditions. And then, as we mentioned earlier, the Harbor Walk, which came along as part of our discussions. With the group that I mentioned earlier, we've met, this will be our 26th meeting coming up next Tuesday. So we started meeting every 2 weeks and then put that off to one monthly meeting since we had the plans together. But it was a collaborative effort and everyone contributed to the meetings. They usually lasted about a half hour, but it was just enough to keep the project on schedule and heading in the right direction. And I'm pleased to report that at this point we're essentially done with the work that we had. The goal was to identify the issues that we needed to address, come up with a plan for it. And then what we further did is we came up with the information that's required for the next level of funding through Seaport. So that was coming up in November. I understand now it may be delayed until the spring for the next round. But in my report is all the information you need to file for the engineering and permitting for the next phase of this work. All right, and with that we can turn to the next slide. This is again, John Ramsey came before you in December 2023 and presented his findings on his predictions for sea level rise. We continue on to the next slide. So from that, we came up with two numbers, 11.3 and 13.6. The 11.5 will be the elevation that we're going to raise the parking lot to, and also Massachusetts Court. The average elevation now is 7 to 9 feet relative to NEBD 88, which is essentially mean sea level. And what that will do is it'll raise the structures out of the floodplain, predicted floodplain for 2050, and provide the degree of coastal resiliency. Please.
Could you just say that a little bit slower?
Okay.
We've had a discrepancy on this issue. So right now, the present site is 7 to 9 feet NAVD. What does that mean?
NEBD. So NEBD 88 is a datum, elevation datum. It's essentially relative to mean sea level, more or less.
So it is currently 7 to 9. The proposal is 11.3.
Yeah, 11 point. Well, so I'm going to round it up to 11.5. That will bring the parking lot up to the end of the new boat ramp to 11.5, and the pier up to 11.5. Now the 13.6 is going to be the seawalls. So intermittent in the openings will be a seawall will be raised to 13.6, and the reason that is that it takes into account wave propagation during storm events.
So parking lot 2 to 4 feet additionally, and then 4 to 6 on the seawall.
Exactly.
Or just
The last time we had this discussion, I remember, thinking about that and elevating the parking lot behind the Nathaniel Windsor House would in essence have the Nathaniel Windsor House down in a hole, which at that time of the discussion was somewhat problematic. I find this very hard to interpret with the existing structures that are in that area and elevating up, big areas of concrete. It really is hard for me to envision.
No, thank you for the question. This is something, if we can go to the next slide, I can show you how that's going to be worked out. So this is the proposed conditions. In this case, we'd have Massachusetts Court, which would be widened to 22.5 feet, which meets Harrison, which is across the way. So they would be at the same elevation. Right now, the flood patterns, when it floods out here, obviously the parking area behind the Nathaniel Windsor House floods. It floods back here. This entire area floods, and it floods in the Duxbury Bay Maritime School. the flooding that occurs back here is propagated. It comes around from the creek and comes up in this direction. So that would continue. So the flooding that's existing there now during those storm events would continue until something is done about raising the elevation of these structures. Earlier we discussed that Washington Street may need to be raised at some point. So this is just, how do you address, the potential of 4 more feet of sea level rise in the future? You need to raise structures. You need to raise abutting properties. But in the interim, what we're doing is we're raising essential infrastructure, which a town needs to respond to emergencies, to have parking area, to be able to use the boat ramp at all tides. And everything within these parcels drains onto itself. So for a regular storm event, rain's contained on the road and in the parking lot. It's not going to flood abutting properties. What it will not do is impact the existing floodways that exist now based on coastal storms until such time as adjustments are made on these properties in some future date, which will accommodate that problem. So you can't really eliminate the flooding potential without completely elevating the entire landform, because water can always sneak around the back and flood it.
And
So-
you're suggesting because these areas of pavement would have its own drainage, that you're not going to negatively impact other, is that what you're suggesting?
That's what the objective is, and that's the way we've looked at the study to be able to do that. So that was one of the objectives that we had, was to have no negative impact on the surrounding properties. Okay?
Is that it for the presentation?
No, a little bit more. Let me go a couple more slides, all right?
Thank you.
So that's the proposed work. Now, the group asked for a rendering. So what we did is we took the plans and created a 3D rendering, 3 different views, showing what this would look like. It shouldn't look much different than it does today, but this is the elevated parking lot. We have a concrete wall around it. This is the new configuration of the town pier as proposed by the Harbor Master's office, new configuration for floats. This is a new boat ramp, which is all tidal. The bottom of it would be at approximately 4 feet below mean low water, so you could use it at a negative tide. You could still deploy a boat and pick it back up. And then we would continue with the elevated seawall across the Duxbury Bay Maritime School and wrap a wall around it to keep floodwaters from encroaching on that. So with another view, this is a view from the Duxbury Bay Maritime School, looking back towards the town parcel. They have asked, and we're working with them now, they wanted to reconfigure their floats in some slightly different configuration. So by the time when this report is amended and finalized, it will be a different configuration of floats out here. But other than that, I think the plan's pretty much is, we're moving it forward. With that, we'll go on to the next slide. This is a view that was shown earlier of the harbor walk coming up between the school and the proposed Harbor Master's office. And the reason why we've moved the Harbor Master's office into the parking lot is because we're landward of the FEMA velocity zone. We've taken the building out of the velocity zone, but we feel will be, pending regulations for Chapter 91 may impact what structures you can build in velocity zone. So for the planning point of view, can we bring it out of the velocity zone and put it into the parking lot without affecting the vehicular traffic and flow patterns, and also continuing this access through what will hopefully be the harbor walk right over to the harbor. Okay, and the next slide. So this is just order of magnitude. Just give you a sense of what these projects are worth. For the town pier and parking lot, again, it's probably raised 20 to 30% more than it needs to be, but this is just right now we're at the order of magnitude stage. We're at about $28 million for the town pier and the parking lot. The Harbor Master's office is about just shy of $3 million, and the Duxbury Bay Maritime School is about $14 million to rebuild about 1,000 feet of new bulkhead completely around that and raise 16,000 square feet of land up against the waterfront. And just a basic schedule. Hopefully, site investigations would begin in 2025, subject to funding. Preliminary designs in 25 and 26. Permitting 26 to 28. Give it 2 years for permitting. You're looking at starting construction on this in 2028, if all goes well. more or less. And the next, one last slide. So right now, we're working on, at the end of the Seaport Economic Council grant. That was granted in 2023. We've extended the grant to November of 2024. That is what the original grant was for. That's the matching funds from the town and from the school. And we still have remaining about $120,000 left in the budget. So we haven't used up, we've used about a little bit more than half the money that was allocated for the project. So, and are there any questions?
Thank you. Any from the board first?
Yeah, you're talking about the fact that there's still flooding that would come up from the creek, I think.
Yes.
Now, is that area that has a dock, if you're standing in the water, to the left of DBMS?
Right, and it's over by, it's between that and Bayside Marine. So it's-
Okay.
Right.
And there's no way to alter that to make it so the water wouldn't flow up there?
That's a low spot. So that intersection by Washington Street's a low spot, and that still floods.
Okay.
So other than completely blocking that, and when it actually comes up through the drainage system, it would come up through that, like it does down at the parking area over in Situate when there's flooding events.
Okay.
So part of the recommendation is to elevate certain landforms, and eventually everybody will start to elevate, and suddenly the problem will go away. But I think the idea, I hope that's the case, but the idea is to be able to work together and with the butters so that you don't negatively impact the budding properties when you propose something like this.
Okay. Thanks.
So are we gonna ask the elephant in the room is how could this ever be funded? What is the funding proposal for?
Well,
Well,
Right
I
now-
guess if we take baby steps here, thank you. You had mentioned that the next step here is to take this report and submit it to somebody in the
all
spring.
right, so the Seaport Economic Council, the next phase in this is the engineering and the permitting for the project, which you need to do. So
And
they would
how
help
would that be paid for?
they would fund that up to a certain amount, and the town and the school would contribute 20% of that.
So they being the Seaport Economic
Council is one
Funds.
venue. And then when the project, let's say we're ready to go to, the town's ready to go to construction, there's a dams and seawalls fund through the EOEA, which will be able to use for all the seawall work. So there'll be various funding mechanisms that will be able to hopefully contribute to this project coming together in many different agencies. So it is a complicated project. I mean, the footprint's about 1.5 acres total, but there's so much going on in that 1.5 acres. And and I think, working closely with the town and then being able to manage it properly, I think that's how you're going to succeed in this job. It's going to be able to apply to the right agencies for the funding that you need to be able to put it together.
Well, that certainly is a comfort because the town is looking at some huge expenses in other areas with water and other issues that are facing the town. So to think of another, $100 million project is staggering. So it's great to know that there are a variety of resources out there that may be able to fund some or all of these types of projects. It's great.
You have a question?
I do. You mentioned there were like 24, 26 meetings so far.
Yes.
Has the public been involved in this at all?
Well, it's been the abutters. We've had one meeting with the select board. We've had one meeting with the Coastal Resiliency Task Force, and we've had site meetings. So this has been the working group that's been involved with the project.
Okay, and Amy, as you were talking about the other many millions of dollars that we've already encumbered, I was back in my mind, I was just thinking how important public input is going to be on this, because it's a shared and important resource for sure, but in terms of how we approach it and how much the town is willing to spend is going to be a much larger discussion, I think, than right here.
Oh, I agree, and I think that's one of the reasons Mr. Reed suggested that we have this meeting before you once the report's been completed. So
Okay. All right, so just to be clear, nobody's marching off to go bid something, to go build something. I mean, we're still at the infancy of this, right?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Thank you.
I have no questions. We do have a question from the audience. If you would mind going up and just introducing yourself.
Sure, please.
Thank you. Yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it was quite a presentation. I'm just wondering if there's been anything done like this at any other community that we could go visit to this scale and scope.
Sure.
Thank you.
It might have been, I believe, 15 to 16 years ago. The Situate Marine Park is a good example of it.
Yeah.
And then we're currently working with the town of Hingham to bring up the whole waterfront in Hingham up to a certain elevation. So the walls will be brought up. The state is, MassDOT's redoing 3A, bringing that up, and we're bringing Town Wharf and Barnes Wharf, the town parking lot and the beach areas up to the same thing, the same idea. And in that case, we're able to take 11.5 and bring it right across the entire waterfront to keep water from coming over. Because at that point, we'll have, be able to control any sort of flooding that occurs there.
I think to Brian's point and Amy's point about the funding, I recall something from the Situate project that there was a lot of funding for that from the Seaport Economic Group. Was I 30 million, somewhere in that ballpark?
Yeah, I don't think it was that much. I can look back and I'll share that information with Rainey at some point. But yeah, there was a considerable amount of money that was raised for that. There was an active group within Situate that was working very closely with the town administrator, the harbor master, and there was a public entity that was also involved. And that's how that project came together.
I guess my point being is further discussions, some comparisons to these other towns, how they were funded.
Sure.
And because we're not the first to be looking at something like this.
No, and I think this will be a recurring, the recurring theme in a lot of coastal communities is how to address sea level rise, especially as we get closer to 2040 and 2050.
Okay.
If I could just add another, the idea of elevating, continue to, elevate and elevate, it does seem to, you're really fighting Mother Nature here, and it's not, there's got to be a way to elevate some things. At the same time, we have to start thinking about, pushing back, retreating back. There's got to be some kind of a balance there, because I fear that we're, this elevation approach may not have a longevity.
It's pretty hard to say that you're just going to retreat from Snug Harbor.
I agree.
I mean,
I
that's,
agree.
one of our major business.
No, I don't, and I'm not suggesting we do that, but I do think that there's got to be.
Yeah. Oh,
And
absolutely.
when this project, if and when it gets to the permitting stage, those are the type of questions that will be evaluated during the permitting stage, because you've got to come up with rationale for what you're proposing as opposed to other alternatives.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank
Very
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very
All right.
much.
Thanks, Carl.
Next item on the agenda, we have a discussion regarding an update from the MBTA Communities Working Group.
Lots of updates.
Start with
Thanks a bit.
the chair, right?
Yep, Steve Gant.
Chair of the MBTA Communities Working Group, Steve Gant.
Yep. Great. Thank you, Mike. Yes, Steve Gant, 265 West Street, and as you say, Chair of the MBTA Communities Working Group. So tonight, I'm here to present to the Select Board a minor change to the zoning map for the Bonji site. This is one of two sites that are being proposed for an overlay district for the to comply with the MBTA Communities, Duxbury's obligations under the MBTA Communities law. You'll recall the last time that we met, the last map you saw, this is it right here. The map looked like this. So I'm specifically focusing on the two yellow areas that you see right there, the border of Kingstown Way. Those are the lots that we had originally proposed to designate as mixed-use subdistricts for the Bonji site. We'd planned to allow mixed-use buildings on those subdistricts to be 2 stories. So you'd have a first floor commercial, and then 1 story on top of that would be a residential use above it. However, what we've realized with the help of our consultant Stantec is that in order for the residential units in these 2 sub-districts to be included in the total permitted unit count for Bonji's, the mixed-use buildings would have to be 3 stories with 2 stories of residential use. So again, you'd have the 1 story of commercial and then 2 stories of residential above that. So we, in the working group, we discussed this and we realized that this conflicted with our intent that the mixed-use buildings would only be 2 stories, as these buildings would be street-facing. So if we could go to the next slide. So here, so to correct this, Stantec recommended that we simply omit those mixed-use sub-districts from the proposed overlay and leave those parcels as they're currently zoned, which is they're zoned NB1. So they would not be part of the proposed overlay that we're proposing for compliance with the MBTA Communities Law. So what this did was this reduced the number of units, or the number of permitted units at Bonji's by 8 units down to 267. And those were reallocated to Island Creek, so that in effect what we're doing is we're maintaining the same 788 total permanent units that you saw the last time I presented to you. So the total number of permitted units is going to remain unchanged at 788. Unfortunately, the last slide is actually inaccurate, so that's my fault. I apologize for that. I'll follow up as I need to. But what I can do is I can give you the revised figures here. So they are, so for Island Creek, they'd be at 462 residential units and 59 Island Creek mixed use. So the 59 would be part of the mixed use district at Island Creek. And then the 267 residential units at Bonji's. So you add all that up, that's how you get to the 788. And so we're, so that's really the change here. It's quite simple. We really just removed that particular mixed-use district from the Bonji site. We're currently planning. We have our second group working group meeting tomorrow, as Brian had mentioned earlier. We are planning our second open house event for Thursday, October 17th. We are also continuing to discuss the draft bylaw that we're responsible for drafting, and we'll continue to do that as part of our meeting tomorrow. We're tracking right now to have a final draft bylaw to the planning board in advance of their public hearing scheduled for October 21st. And with that, I will leave it open for questions and comment.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just level set and reiterate the function of the working group. There's been much discussion about whether the town has to comply with this at all. If we don't comply, what if? Those sorts of things are not within the purview of the working group's charge. The working group, of which I am a member as well, has been charged with and is pursuing, in good faith, an effort to put together a bylaw that the town could adopt if special town meeting decides to go forward. So at a open forum, or excuse me, a public forum on September 5th, standing room only at the Senior Center. It was terrific to see so many people come out and express their views. I think there may have been some misconceptions that the working group is advocating for the zoning, and I want to be very clear that the working group is agnostic as to the zoning proposal, whether this is a good or a bad idea. They're simply putting together the framework or the details of a bylaw to propose to town meeting. Town meeting is then free to adopt or not adopt. So I just want to make that clear as we have a discussion with Steve tonight about the updates. It has to do with the bylaw that potentially could be adopted, but we don't get into issues of the what-ifs. I know council is here tonight, and this board certainly can talk about that, but that's separate from the working group is doing. I think that's, did I miss anything, Steve, on that?
I think you nailed it. Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I might ask the same question of council, but has the committee discussed the idea of this feasibility study incorporating that into the bylaw at all, or into the warrant article, or asking for more time for it, or anything like that.
That's regarding the affordable unit.
Yes.
Right,
Because
so-
we kicked this around at a meeting before.
Right, and Mike, just to give you to give perspective, so that was the purpose of the feasibility study, would be to explore the feasibility of increasing the affordability threshold for the overlay district above 10%. We're able to impose a 10% affordability threshold on the district without having to do a feasibility study. But if we wanted to go above 10%, and that's something that we've looked at, we would need to do the feasibility study in order to do that. So I'm just kind of setting the table for your question. So the answer to your question is yes, we have looked at that. We've really focused on drafting the bylaw right now, given the time constraint that we have. I think it would be very difficult to get a good feasibility study in place by the time that we would have to have this done. So we have looked at it. If we had more time, I think we would, this is something that we'd be able to look at a little bit more in depth. But again, given the time constraint that we're under, that's something that we've considered it, but we have not yet moved forward with it.
I can answer that question more
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
particularly. So we did inquire of a local resource, whether that would be possible, and if so, how quickly. We got an honest answer, but it wasn't the answer we were looking for. I have since, on behalf of the working group, have reached out to MAPC to see if they may be able to help, given the timeframes we have and the constraints. I have sent 2 requests now to get a response. I have not yet heard back. I'm pushing.
Okay.
So, and that's the issue of, you asked about the feasibility study.
Right.
Council, Attorney Questle. So I have 2 questions. Can we request a extension of the deadline? And if not, what are other towns doing?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Amy Questle, KP Law, Town Council. You can request an extension. I do not think you would be granted an extension. So, I had a meeting today with EOHLC. They have not granted any extensions to date. So.
Can you just tell us what EOHLC stands for?
Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. It's the new DHCD, which was the Department of Housing and Community Development. And so they are administrating compliance with Section 3A, which is MBTA zoning. And EOHLC has said that they have not, granted any requests. However, if we're talking about the EFS, the Economic Feasibility Study, you don't necessarily have to have your EFS in hand when you go to town meeting. The EFSs take a while. They do take a long time. They are quite involved. And so we have crafted fail-safe language for these zoning bylaws, and they have been approved by the Attorney General's office, and EOHLC is also comfortable with them. And essentially it says that there shall be 20% affordability. However, if the EFS comes back and is not approved by HLC, it drops down to 10%. So it gives cities and towns the opportunity to come forward to try and increase that affordability without having to scramble like you guys are doing and getting an EFS.
Amy, is 20% the ceiling?
20% is. And it's my understanding that 20% is very hard to achieve even with an EFS. Most come back around 15 or 13.
Okay. Any more questions on the feasibility end? Because I did have some other questions for Attorney Questle.
Just a practical question, I guess. If 20% is the max that would be allowed under the statute, and the state is not approving 20 for practical purposes, what would be the benefit then of a property receiving the zoning as opposed to just a 40B, where you can have your 25% affordability?
That this is a mandated law. So,
It's a law or a mandate?
It's a statute. It's a statute. It's a law, yeah.
Through the chair.
Mr. Chairman, did you want me to answer that?
Sure.
It is a law. It's a statute.
Yes.
It's 40A, Section 3A.
To that end, there's certainly as this becomes more public and there's more information available to people, there is a lot of concerns, particularly about the Bonges area and the number of units that would go in there. What does Duxbury stand to lose if this zoning is not passed?
Sure. So under the statute lists 4 funding sources. And emanating from those 4 funding sources, the guidelines list 13 funds that that are specifically part of these 4 funding sources. Those funds are things such as MassWorks, Safe Streets, things like that, which are very common grants used by cities and towns. However, that being said, all grants are discretionary. That is, in their nature, they are discretionary. And what we have seen is that most grants are subject to compliance with all statutes and regulations. And so there's a very, very good chance that grant money that's not listed under 3A, Section B, could be, or Section C, I'm sorry, could be subject to losing those funds. So for example, in Milton, the Seaport Economic Council money was taken away from them because that grant specifically stated that they had to be in compliance.
Mr. Chairman, I just handed you a sheet that Mary prepared for us to this purpose, and I'll let her talk you through it.
So what I had the accounting office do is take a look at our state grants that we have been awarded in the past 24 months so that you can see historically the agencies from whom we are receiving grant funds. If you look in from the right-hand side of the page, the second column in from the right, where I've labeled it MBTA risk, where you see a yes indicated, where you see a yes indicated in that column, those awarding agencies are specifically called out in 3A, the statute that Amy is referring to. So if you flip to the second page, I have totaled those up, and you'll see that the grants that we have received within the past 24 months that totaled $2.377 million. If we were not in compliance with this MBTA community statute, we would not have received those grant funds. What this chart does not include is the grant applications that are currently actively being developed and ideally submitted to these agencies that are being called out in this statute. So we know that coastal zone management, we have a grant application that's actively being prepared and being submitted. Amy also just mentioned Safe Streets and Complete Streets. We know that we've had conversations with the Sidewalk Committee recently, and they are looking to submit a $400,000 grant application to Complete Streets for some advancement in their initiatives. So this is what would have potentially been at risk had these grants been the ones that we had been applying for under the MBTA communities compliance. And so you can see that on the order of magnitude, the town has received substantial funding so far from these agencies, and we know that we've got a lot of initiatives that we are actively pursuing that could potentially be at risk. The project that Carlos just talked about, a Seaport Economic Council grant, we would not be eligible for if we were not in compliance.
So on that point, so these were over 24 months, so it's about, $2,400,000. So if you cut that in half and look at it on a yearly basis, it's, half that, so $1.2 million. So, when you think about this, and this is, I think, how a lot of people are thinking about it, is that, yes, we know what we would be giving up in that type of grant money funding source. What the cost of the dense development would be to every taxpayer is also of significance when you're trying to weigh the pros and cons. So you're giving this up, but you're going to be paying the amount we do not know more in your taxes every year moving forward forever. What you also don't know is the impact to the value of your home. Duxbury values are what they are because we have made smart choices with development in the past and continue to do so. This forcing zoning upon us has the ability to significantly devalue our properties. So devaluing, costing us more, and, you know, giving up grants. So it's a really hard, and especially not knowing some of the numbers, not knowing what the cost of 700 additional units in town is going to be to the taxpayers. There's a lot of unknowns, which I think makes it very, very difficult.
And I think this is worth kind of illuminating for the public, because I'm glad you did this, because I was kind of concerned that there were reoccurring grants that we would lose out on every year, because one of the other questions I had for Attorney Questle was, is this forever? And it's yes. But none of these grants that are on here are reoccurring grants. These were one-shot planning grants, the bulk of which was this $2 million for sand that we went in with Marshfield.
But that is reoccurring. It's only a
Well, it was
small portion of that.
Yeah, that's
that
one-
project.
no, yes.
4%.
I'm saying like none of the like 911, none of that stuff that we rely on every year.
But as Amy said, you've got to remember, all grants are discretionary, and those dispatch grants make up $10 million in the aggregate, at least.
Yeah.
And that dispatch center does not operate without those.
No,
Well-
it shuts down.
So I heard about the seawall issue. Are there towns that have been threatened about their public safety grants because of not complying with this?
So we're currently only in the second round of compliance. The first round was for rapid transit, and that was December 31st of 2023. And as most of you know, all of those 13 communities complied except for Milton. And so right now, the other, the 130 towns that are adjacent communities or transit communities, their compliance is up December 31st of 2024. So technically, none of those towns are out of compliance. So none of them have been threatened. Only Milton has been threatened. It's my understanding their public safety grants were not taken away. All of the grants from EOHLC and EOEEA, I'm kind of killing you with initials tonight, but sorry. That's the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So anything like CZM, anything like that, they were taken away.
Yeah, we certainly, we have a pending grant with CZM right now for the seawall. And
Then the Seaport grant
the-
is the Snug Harbor.
we just talked about,
That's
yeah.
like $30 million.
no, well, I think I was wrong on that number.
What?
He said I was probably wrong on that
Oh,
number.
well, it says 28 for the parking lot and pier.
Well, that's what
3 for
we
the
might have to
Comcast
pay.
room.
If
That's
that
the
moves
cost.
forward.
The Seaport Economic Grant
That's just
wouldn't
the
cover
cost of
that
it.
whole thing.
No, but,
We have no idea what
no,
the grants
but
are.
it's a portion of it.
What is Milton doing? What are other towns that haven't passed or are not going to pass, or what are people doing?
So, so everyone's waiting. So Milton, all of the briefs are filed, and the argument will be on October 7th at the SJC, the Supreme Judicial Court. And as of Friday, there were 4 amicus briefs filed, 6 amicus briefs filed. 2 were from towns, Hamilton and Middleborough, which my firm, myself, authored. And as of when I came here tonight, around 6:30 tonight, today was the last day to file amicus briefs. There are now 46 amicus briefs.
So is that 46 of the 130
No.
communities have?
Only Middleborough and Hamilton, as communities, filed amicus briefs that I can tell from my quick review. The others are from AFL-CIO, the Eastern Massachusetts Small Business Association, REBA, CHAPA, housing groups, community groups. Lots of groups have filed amicus. So the SJC did put out a call for amicuses, which they do in certain cases. So they did put out a call for them. I personally, I don't know if I've ever seen this many, but they're out there. So it's a very hot topic, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. And so the SJC will hear arguments on October 7th, and I have no idea when we'll get a decision. Having them know that this compliance deadline is December 31st, 2024, maybe they'll push this to the top of their pile. I don't know. And so Milton is arguing essentially what most municipalities are arguing, which is that this law was the legislature required that under Section A, that it's mandatory compliance. Under Section B, if you do not comply, you lose grants, and then under C are the grants that you lose. And the AG has overstepped. So that is essentially the argument from the municipalities. And the Attorney General, she's basing everything off of one of her statutes, one of her empowering statutes that allows for her to enforce for the public good. And so in the Milton brief and in our Hamilton and Middleborough briefs, we argued that because this is only 177 communities as opposed to 351 communities, it's more specified. It's not necessarily the overall public good. And we have argued, again, that the statute has a built-in enforcement mechanism. And so by having the Attorney General sue Milton was not proper. In the Attorney General's complaint, she sought, in Milton, she sought to have injunctive relief, whereby the court would order that within 3 months the town, Milton, enact the zoning. If that did not work, that the second relief was that the town not enforce zoning, meaning if a multifamily developer came in and wanted to build a multifamily development, they would have to be allowed, and the building inspector or building commissioner would have to issue a building permit. And the third was that they would that a special master would somehow be appointed to create this zoning. From the Attorney General's briefs in this matter, it appears that she has backed off of 2 and 3 a bit, and it's really just an injunctive. She's looking for an injunctive relief.
Well, that's kind of one of my questions too. Is there an argument that even the AG, Attorney General's making, or anyone's making, that if a town doesn't pass the zoning, that they can come in and do it themselves?
That was brought up in her complaint with this special master, is what I'm thinking that's where she was trying to get to. And so, again, if you back up this request for injunctive relief, which was her request in her complaint, was that the court order that the zoning be enacted, and then within 3 months the town has to enact that zoning. So I don't know how that happens. From a mechanical standpoint, how do you go to town meeting and order people to vote a certain way? That's completely against the purest form of government, which is town meeting.
Yeah, right.
So it is questionable. I was able to argue for the town of Holden was the only town that did not file an interim compliance as of January 31st of 2024. And they were sued by a civil rights group and a housing group. And we were able to argue that that was dismissed, that case was dismissed on standing and mootness. However, during the argument, we did argue, the Attorney General's, ability to sue cities and towns. And we did receive favorable comments from the court at that time. However, the decision is based purely on standing. So we didn't get really anything in writing on that, but the case was dismissed.
May I just ask one more?
Yeah.
Has anyone, you've mentioned that Milton is arguing that there are set penalties.
Correct.
Has anybody argued that those penalties and these other threatened ideas that they can condition various grants on compliance are arbitrary and inconsistent with the purpose of the housing statute in and of itself?
So all Milton and all of the amicus briefs in supporting Milton, all are arguing that the guidelines that were implemented by EOHLC are ultra virus and they should not be in effect. Essentially they've gone overboard with these guidelines. There hasn't been a particular argument that the funds and the granting, the taking away grants is not permissible. Again, I would go back to my statement that grants in and of themselves are discretionary. So you could get a grant from Seaport Economic Council. They can put in whatever conditions they want because it's a discretionary pot of money. So
What's interesting is that grants, in effect, are funded by our tax dollars. They're just moving around money, really. So,
yes, most of them.
I mean, that's the path. I'll pass it along to.
I'm just wondering, we have heard that other neighboring towns, I think Marshfield, Norwell, Foxborough, there's quite a few towns where town meeting has rejected the zoning. If our town moves in that direction, does KP represent some of those other towns? What are they doing? Could we all, work together? Because I think if that's where this goes, we're all, we all have a common issue here.
Right. So there are numerous towns that failed at the spring town meeting. Some of those towns are coming back in the fall, and others are not. Others have just said we're not going to come back. And so, it's a really good question that you pose. I don't have the exact answer, but we have kicked it around, and it would be my assumption that if the SJC comes back in favor of the Attorney General, and the Attorney General does have the ability to go after cities and towns, it would be my assumption that she would file a suit against all, whichever cities and all of these cities and towns that are not in compliance. So it wouldn't be necessarily individual cities and towns. So, and then, yes, we would be representing everybody in the same vein.
It's called a revolution.
I have another word for it.
And I don't know if there's wisdom to wait, it's going to be up to town meeting, and the residents have a really, really hard choice. This is just so difficult, and I think one of the biggest issues facing the town that I can ever remember. I think this really is incredibly impactful, and I think it is a real tough pill to swallow because we have always learned that we have home rule, that we can make our own choices when it comes to zoning, within reason, but so to have this forced upon us is, it's not right.
Mr. Chairman, a couple of things. Amy, thank you for all of this. I know that you're kind of in the epicenter of all that, being with the premier municipal law firm in the Commonwealth. It's an inside joke. I used to work there. In terms of the extensions that other communities asked for and did not receive, what sort of timeframes were they asking for, and did you get any read from the Commonwealth or from the executive office as to the rationale for not granting any extensions?
So there are no extensions. So that's the rationale is there's no mechanism to ask for an extension. So individual towns have reached out to HLC and said, can we get an extension? And their answer is we don't grant extensions. There's no mechanism for extensions in the guidelines.
Okay, so they're just saying they don't have the authority to grant the extensions.
Or they're not willing to, I guess, I would say.
Okay, so that's one thing, although I would ask this board to consider strongly filing a formal request for an extension.
Can't hurt.
I don't see a downside in asking. They may say no, but maybe they'll say yes. The other is there any legislative activity, this is a creature of statute, this whole conundrum that we're in, is there any legislative activity that you're aware of or the firm's aware of that we should be cognizant of or keeping our eyes on, saying, well, this representative or this senator has proposed, modifying the statute, or is there anything like that going on?
There's nothing formal. This was amended once, and it was amended to add another funding source to take away from you guys. So it wasn't amended in your favor, but it was amended immediately afterwards. But no, there's nothing formal. There's the Holden case, which is we were able to dismiss the complaint. That was appealed. That's up at the appeals court. That's being stayed. There's obviously the Milton case, and there's another case. There's a Rockport case, which is a group of citizens in Rockport has sued the town in federal court for enacting 3A zoning. So in that instance, Rockport enacted the zoning, MBTA community zoning. It passed at town meeting, and they filed a lawsuit in federal court. Interestingly, they filed the lawsuit prior to town meeting, but it passed, so it was fine.
Okay.
And that group previously sued the town of Rockport in state court. We were able to get that dismissed. We also represent Rockport. So I was able to get that dismissed, but the federal court case, we filed a motion to dismiss, and that is pending. Now, that group of citizens in Rockport, there were citizens groups from 4 separate towns that tried to intervene. Manchester by the Sea, Hamilton, Wayland, and one other town had a group of residents that tried to intervene. So there is a grassroots group out there that is trying to, it appears, trying to fight this.
We should try to reach out.
Anyone else on the board? Anyone else in the community? Thank you very much, Council. I appreciate it. It's late.
Not for KP.
No.
This is mid-afternoon.
Okay, I obviously know that I'm kind of stepping into this topic a little late. I haven't been able to make the working group meetings or the public outreach, but I kind of repeatedly hear you guys asking for community feedback and help, and you're asking questions, and I think the thing I hear the most is, what are other towns doing? So just to kind of educate myself over the weekend, to get myself up to speed with the topic and maybe offer a little help, I spent my weekend in the rabbit hole of Google, and I found some pretty interesting things that I thought I would share. I think might be important to the working group especially. And forgive me if these are things that you already know. I'm just trying to be helpful and pass along some things that may be a little bit of a grenade in the plan.
Alicia, did you introduce yourself? I'm
Sure, sorry. Alicia Babcock, Ocean Road South.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I do want to say that there was an opportunity for something called a pre-adoption review application. And it seems to me that a lot of these communities that went before spring town meeting filled this form out in advance of the meeting to get feedback, because it's a vehicle for towns to use so that they'll have some sort of like best guess whether or not they'll be in compliance before they go to town meeting and ask for a vote. I have a stack of rejection letters here. It's not really that easy to be in compliance. The state seems to be pretty particular about what they're looking for. And many of these towns have had communications with the state, and they've also had consultants, and they've still been rejected. The entire plans haven't necessarily been scrapped, but portions of them, the towns have been asked to go back and revisit things and add things, and they've denied things. So it seems like a pretty important thing that we didn't do. I think probably a lot of that had to do with the fact we didn't have a planner. And it's kind of been maybe a little bit of a choppy go toward this.
Let me just ask, quick cut you off there. Does anybody from the working group want to address this form? I'm sure you're aware of it.
I can address it.
Thank you.
Sure. Yep. Do you mind if I leave my stuff there?
Please, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yep, so Steve Gant, West Street. Yeah, so the idea, as you were surmising, we were under a particular time crunch, and we had the map and the bylaw to get ready, and given the workload that we had, the challenges that we faced, that was something that we just were not able to pull together in time to get to the 90 days prior to town meeting that's scheduled, and so it was just primarily a time constraint that we weren't able to submit a preliminary plan.
Do either you, Paul, or council have any input on whether about the possibility of EOA passes a town meeting and Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities rejects our plan?
We have not addressed that. Our focus really has been on submitting a plan, the best plan that we possibly can, in conjunction with the work that we're doing with our consultant. And provided that we can put something in that, to the best of our ability, to the best of our consultant's knowledge, is going to be compliant. That's the plan that we have in front of us, and that's what we are. That's what we're planning to do. That's what we intend to do. And so we have not put any kind of contingency together if for some reason that plan should be rejected.
Is there timing enough to submit something like this before town meeting?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't looked at that. We can discuss that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And the council's going to step up.
I would say, I think EOHLC would work with the town. Once a bylaw is ready, they won't get a formal pre-adoption review, which, as she said, the formal pre-adoption review is very, very detail-oriented, and they go through everything. But I'm sure that EOHLC would at least have a conversation with the town about their proposed bylaw.
Okay, so when before we go to town meeting, we have a bylaw, we should run it by EOA, not formally, but like in a...
Yep, and then also the Attorney General's office will also do a pre-adoption review. Okay. And they're much more flexible.
Thank you.
So the question, of course, is without one of those and a plan that we bring forward to town meeting, and I have to assume, based on the history of the town, this probably will not pass. But in the event that it does, and we are in non-compliance and we've voted on something that gets rejected.
That's why I asked all these questions.
Right.
Yeah.
So now what happens? So So my question then maybe for Amy is, if we have a plan that gets rejected, I know they're not granting technically extensions, but just by virtue of the good faith effort of submitting a plan and having to revise it, does that then somewhat equal an extension? And would that buy us time to go before spring town meeting?
I would hope so. So I truly think that, that if the town does enact zoning and for some reason it does not pass compliance with the HLC, that you would be allowed to go back to the Springtown meeting. I don't know for sure. Again, this is it's a brand new law, but that would be my hope.
My other question is, if we vote on something and the plan changes, now the town has voted on something, and now, how, does that vote stand? Or do we need to go back and vote again because the town has not voted on the actual plan?
You have to go back. So this is a problem with the legislation that we identified early on. And what happens is that zoning is enacted when it's voted on at town meeting. That's the date of enactment. And so this zoning will take effect whether it is approved by HLC or not. So once that zoning passes at town meeting, that zoning is on the books. And so to amend that zoning, you have to go back to town meeting. But just to be clear, once you enact it, it's on the books.
That's going to require a 2/3 vote at town meeting, is that
No,
right?
Majority.
50%.
Majority. First zoning I've ever seen that only requires a majority.
Yeah, they wrote that in. Yeah.
Isn't that nice?
Oh, sorry.
So, if I may, that changed recently, Ms. McNabb. There was an amendment to 40A Section 5 that allows for majority voting on zoning amendments for multifamily housing as of right, for accessory dwelling units, and for an increase in parking and anything to encourage multifamily housing.
Do you have another question, or are you also?
No, I actually have a little more information for you.
Okay.
So, as it relates to the pre-adoption review, would it be okay if I made some copies of this stuff for you?
Well, I was
Would it
going to
be okay
suggest,
if I-
we
if I
are in an
just give
open
this-
comment period.
Yeah.
If there's some information you want to provide to the board,
Yeah.
maybe just email it to us after this meeting, and we can
Okay, because it's
react to it at
kind
the
of a
next
lot.
meeting.
But the thing is, just because they're having a working group meeting tomorrow, there is something that I thought was kind of critical to bring up.
Yeah, and can you condense
and-
it to as opposed to going through something that you have to hand out or anything like that? Is it
No, I just want to bring up the fact that I think that there's been a misconception on the count of units. We are counting 358 from Island Creek as exempt, and we, I think, are using that number and we're deducting it from the overall total that we're being mandated. My understanding is that that is not the case, because it says here that, so this is how the unit capacity is offset and calculated.
So you're reading from the actual legislation, from the,
Yes.
okay.
Well,
Yes. Which is
yeah,
what I,
no.
which is what I wanted to give you.
okay.
Can I-
May I,
Yeah.
so these folks from the MBTA Communities
Yep.
Group have been working on this a long time.
Yep.
Bears repeating. Would one of you mind just fleshing this out just quickly for Ms.
Babcock.
Babcock? Sorry, it's late.
Yep.
Sorry, Alicia.
So the way that we've understood it and the way that our consultant Stantec has explained it to us is that, looking at Island Creek specifically, there are 358 units, multifamily units that pre-exist there. And one of the overlays that we're proposing is over the Island Creek district. Our understanding is that in terms of the total number of units that we would be permitting as part of this exercise, we would in fact deduct those 358 units from the units that could be developed. So the number that we're working with right now is 788. That's kind of the top line number. But then when we're looking at what could possibly be developed, you have to deduct those 358 units to get to the net new units that could possibly be developed. That's the way that it's been explained to us
And what's
by our
the net
consultants at
for,
Stantec.
what would be the net new units for Island Creek?
Oh,
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know.
Yeah, I've given it
I didn't
before,
put you on
so
the
you
spot.
can
We had
run it
that
out.
last.
So,
That's fine.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you knew it off the top of your head. But, okay, so that's your understanding
so
of it.
that's how we've understood it from the beginning,
Okay.
right?
That's not how it's written, no, that's
All right, so if Ms.
So it's-
Babcock, you
yeah.
have something you want to share with them?
Yep, I can do that. I just think that you ought to know that the total, basically, it all has to equal. It all has to equal up to the total amount that the state's mandating. So you're getting credit for the 358, but you have to put the 358 somewhere else. And when you have a mandatory mixed-use component, that 358 has to go into the mixed-use portion of the plan, because it all has to total at the end the same amount of units that we've been mandated. It's not like they get erased.
Well,
And in order to have a mixed-use component, it says here that you must submit this pre-authorization form 90 days prior to the vote. Otherwise, you can't have that component. And Shrewsbury did not file it in time, and they had to remove it from their warrant. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands that. And I have a lot more, but those were sort of like, the big things that I think are going to affect the plan and compliance. And I think that we ought to prepare ourselves for getting rejected, either by the state or by the town.
Well said, Ms. Babcock. If you have some other questions, is there someone from the working group that?
I'll plan on going to the meeting tomorrow.
Excellent. This 90-day thing with Shrewsbury, does anybody care to respond, Paul or anyone, about sending in this trying to absorb these units? Did we miss some deadline? Is there something we missed here? Do we know anything about that?
So, as I mentioned before, the initial hope was that we would be able to have a draft map and a draft bylaw that we could submit to EOHLC for their review, and then get that preliminary indication from them as to whether or not, if we submitted this for a vote to town meeting and it passed, that it would be acceptable, or that the state would find it acceptable. As I mentioned before, given the time crunch that we were under, we just weren't able to get to that 90-day review period in order to do that. So that's
It's
the
no fault
rationale
of
there.
yours. I mean, this is the legislation and the timeline that they're providing us, so. But it sounds like from council that maybe there's some type of informal way we can work with the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities.
That's right. So we would be able to to submit it to them before the meeting.
Okay.
And we it's certainly possible that we'd be able to get some feedback before a town meeting.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other members of the community have any questions, concerns, statements they'd like to make?
I have a question for council.
Great.
Maybe if I could just have you come back up for a second. Maybe to split some legal hairs with the Commonwealth, although I'm sure I'm not blazing any new legal trails, but I was just looking at the statute when you had mentioned that EOHLC is saying we're not giving any extensions. The statute itself, as I read it anyway, doesn't have any deadlines. It simply allows, well, that, number one, so there's no deadline in the statute.
Correct.
The deadlines come out of something known as guidelines.
Correct.
So typically, and help me out here, so typically when I've seen statutes that allow an executive office to promulgate rules, That's typically done through regulations, regulatory authority. Is there a legal significance between regulations and guidelines?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So it goes statute, regulations, guidelines, policy. So regulations are higher. They carry more weight than guidelines. And unfortunately, the legislation said that they were able to enact regulations or guidelines. Obviously, they chose guidelines because if they went to enact regulations, they would have to go through the APA,
Right.
and go through all of that, notice requirements, everything like that. And so we're actually seeing this also in the brand new Affordable Homes Act with accessory dwelling units. The exact same language is there, which says that EOHLC may enact regulations or guidelines. There it says may. Here, I think here in this legislation it says shall.
Shall promulgate guidelines.
So that is another argument from cities and towns that these guidelines went way overboard, particularly with these deadlines.
So when I say they, the EOHLC is saying or said to other communities, we're not granting extensions. The extension is to a deadline that they, EOHLC themselves, determined.
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Babcock, do you have a question? Of course. Yep, go right ahead.
I won't get into the nitty-gritty. I just want to focus on our neighboring town of Kingston, which is, making us an adjacent town. I did spend quite a bit of time watching their working group meetings and some of their planning board and select board sessions where they were discussing this. As you know, Valerie Massard, our Old Town planner, is working in Kingston now. She's got this pretty buttoned up, of course. That's kind of how she is. She's got this authorization all teed up to come in 2 to 3 weeks before town meeting for the special town meeting, and they have time to rework it and the whole thing. When it initially got dumped on them, they had a similar reaction to us, and they were like, we don't want this. This is crazy. And the town manager or the town administrator, his initial impulse was, well, we're just going to close the train station. So it doesn't seem like that's the path that they're on anymore, but it certainly was a topic of conversation. They have got a very unique, very MBTA Communities Act friendly town. They've got a mall that was up for redevelopment anyway. They've gotten permission to kind of like go a little bit outside that half-mile zone to incorporate that in. They've got actually a plan that works really well. So it doesn't seem like they're going down the train station route anymore. However, in the vein of these non-compliance letters, you just don't know what the state will come back with, even though they've been in communication with them. It could get rejected for non-compliance, and or the town might not vote for it, in which case, if it's a matter of them being sued or whatever also, maybe they do shut it. I don't know. I think it's a long shot, but I think we should be pretty sure that it's not getting closed before we sign up for something that's, permanent.
Thank you. I did want to make one comment. I'm very appreciative of our interim planner, our MBTA working group. You've been working tremendously hard. Many of you are volunteers, and Brian's been really stepping up as well as a liaison. If nothing at all, you've been transparent, and I think that's really important here. The community needs to know what's going on. So I know there's 5 meetings in the next 3 weeks, and you're setting aside your families and work, so that we're appreciative of that. I think the more information town meeting gets, they can make a well-reasoned decision as best they can under the very rapid-fire parameters that the state has put upon us. So thank you. With that, I'm ready to move on. We are at 10 of 9.
Well, Mr. Chairman, may I, one of the themes that we've heard throughout this process and was heard loud and clear at the September 5th public forum is the need for more time to approach this thoughtfully. This constrained time frame has been particularly difficult and is going to set us up I think, unfortunately for failure. Despite all the terrific efforts of the working group, we're still going to bring something in that's going to be as good as we can do. But I think given some more time, we could do a lot better in terms of the detail. So considering all of the public input we've received that's asked the town, why aren't you asking for an extension at the very least? I think it's worthwhile for this board to authorize a formal request for an extension, whether that's 6 months or, I think, frankly, 12 months would be more appropriate. It may go nowhere, but I think, to your point, Mike, about the working group being transparent, I think this board needs to show that we're listening to the voters and the folks affected by this to say, hey, we realize we have an obligation under the law, but we're also doing everything within our power to make it as palatable as possible, and that we're fighting as may be necessary to preserve our community. So with that, I would offer a motion for this board to authorize a formal extension request to EOHLC for 1 year, from 12/31/24 to 12/31/25.
I'll second your motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Does anybody want to,
I got a question.
Who's gonna write
Is
it?
Amy still here?
Yeah.
Is that something you file, Amy? I can. Okay, since you'd be defending it, it would make sense. Thank you.
I'd be happy to write it. Be on a cocktail napkin, pretty straightforward.
No, and I think it's important to keep up with these discussions. We don't have all the answers for town meeting. We're not going to have all the answers. Another good reason to ask for an extension, but to keep this conversation going with our town council so that we can be in concert with other communities. And our community has the ability to know what other communities are doing to fight this. Because I think there are a lot of people who just don't, me included, I don't feel like this is right, having this mandated to our community goes against so much that we've worked for. So I'm appreciative of that, and I hope we can keep up with keep up with the fight.
all right, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone, for attending. We can move on to the town manager's report.
Thank
very
you,
much.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Last Monday, you had asked for a few things, some of which have already been delivered. You asked for the balances on the ARPA funding, which Mary kindly gave to you. She also gave you the updated list on the grants at risk under the MBTA proposal. You had asked for a status on the PFAS lawsuit being handled by Paul Napoli. That I'm scheduling for a future executive session. And then you had asked for information regarding DPW spending, which I am passing out to you now. You can take a look at it. We don't have to discuss it now, but
To date.
take a look at it, and we'll contemplate it at a later meeting. This past week, I've been working with the Water Department pretty exclusively on a number of procurements that they have going out the door. And today, I issued the letter of award to Northern Construction for the seawall project. I'll find out later this week the time frame when construction will begin, and when that happens, I will provide further info when I get it, so that you'll know. That's my report.
Wow, that was quick.
May I ask Mary, real quick? We got this build to date on the DPW project of, what, 1.73? Is that going to be assessed to taxpayers in this coming year? Will that hit their bills?
It will hit their FY25.
So we spent $1,730,405.
I'm going to qualify.
Yes. Yeah, I don't understand.
So the answer to your question, Mike, is yes. The spending to date will hit the residents' tax bills on their FY25 actual tax bill. However, it will hit in such a way that The interest on the short-term borrowing will hit, which will be less than the full 1.7. So we have not, we've issued short-term notes so far, and when you issue short-term notes, you only pay on the interest until you permanently finance that, and we won't be permanently financing the short-term notes until next year, which means the full amount of what we borrowed will hit the FY26 bill. So a portion will hit FY25, and then the permanently financed monies will hit in FY26.
Okay. And I was reading while you gave some important news in your about, and this is very important too. You awarded the bid to who for the seawall?
Northern Construction.
Okay. When is it anticipated that will get started?
That's what I'm going to find out later this week, and I'll let you guys know when I have a time frame.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right. I have no other questions. Anybody else on the board have any questions? All right.
Are we going to be discussing this again, or what?
Yes, I gave it to you so you could see it now, and
Okay.
we'll talk about it later. Unless you have questions now, I'm happy to try and answer.
No, it's a lot to digest. I think
It is.
It's a tough pill for me to swallow personally, that we've spent, this amount of money, and, I know that certainly work has been done, but it doesn't, translate into something we can see. And, this is such an important project, but it's really a frustrating project as well. So, sorry.
Thank you. Announcements.
2 announcements this evening. The next scheduled Select Board's meeting will be on Monday, September 30th, 2024, at 6:30 PM in the Mural Room. There is no meeting next week, September 23rd. Second, everyone is invited to an Energy Fair 2024 on Saturday, October 5th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the Duxbury High School cafeteria, 71 Alden Street. There will be exhibits on solar for the home, heat pump technology, energy savings methods, and much, much more. There will be EV vehicles on display as well. Save energy, save money, save the planet.
Did that meeting next week come off the schedule?
It wasn't on there originally. We had it on and off. We had loaded this evening's agenda, and we had worked around the 23rd. So we had stuff scheduled for this week and the week after the 23rd.
Okay. Great.
Well, that's all. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone.